Walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors. Walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path. Life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Waudia Seed, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artesana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Waudia Seed. I'm your host, and it is a great joy and pleasure to welcome my guest to the show today, Marissa Baumgartner. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Well, we will start with a question that I ask all of my guests, which is, if your ancestors were here with us now, which of course they always are, how would they introduce you and what role would they say that you play in your family lineage?
I think I first have to say that I love this part of your podcast every time that you ask it to your guests. So I think when I found your show, I didn't even think about myself being a guest. So there's that. But, anyways, I was like, what would I say the first time I heard that? So let me just feel into it for a second, because that's such a big question. And I was tearing up just as you were saying it, because I feel like I try to live in alignment with what my ancestors would have wanted for me every day. And so I think they would say that I'm a teacher, I'm a leader, I'm a mentor, and I love families and children. I love motherhood and womanhood. Just the continuum of life is always very fascinating to me and has a theme throughout all of the work that I do, whether it be working with littles or working with their families or working one-on-one with different people that I come into contact with. It's always in some form or fashion getting that intergenerational healing kicked off for that individual. Sometimes they come into contact me when they're 3, sometimes they're 80. And so I think that, I know my ancestors know me as a very bright light. They make that very clear to me all of the time. they find me everywhere I go. And now, being older and being more open to myself and my gifts, I know when they're around. And so I think I've always just been this open channel between the past and the present, and they make that very clear for me all of the time.
It's beautiful. I love what you spoke to, that sometimes people come to you at age 3 and sometimes they come to you at 80. And it's something that I think about a lot in terms of what the traditional role of a midwife is within an intact culture. And the way in which we think about a midwife in like our Western paradigm is just someone who attends birth. We don't even really think about midwife as someone who like takes care of you in the preconception time or even maybe that much throughout pregnancy, like maybe a few prenatals here and there, or really even someone who's doing a lot of postpartum work. Like when you ask a Western person, like, what do you think a midwife is? They'd be like, oh, they just deliver babies. Versus the traditional role of a midwife is someone who is accompanying all of life's rites of passages and initiation from womb to tomb. And so, what you spoke to of like, yeah, sometimes they're 3 years old, sometimes they're 80, and we're still doing our work together. And that's what I'm showing up as, I think, is such an important reclamation of what that community role actually is as a keeper of women's wisdom more than anything, like expanding out even this title of so-called midwife into something that is so much bigger, which is the medicine woman of the community in whatever capacity that you walk with, of really showing up in women's medicine and women's spaces, women's work, and walking with that. And you do that so beautifully with all of your work. So thank you. I'd love to share a little bit how we got connected. So, I found you on Substack. You subscribed to my Substack, and I looked at your writing, and I was immediately first like, oh, like hummingbird medicine. I believe that's like the name of your Substack, like hummingbird wisdom. And I walk with a lot of hummingbird medicine myself. I guess I could speak a little bit like with the Kofan people when I asked my elders about it, because hummingbirds were like all around all the time when I was living in the jungle. The few things that came through from them was like, one, it's a beautiful protective animal because it can move so fast and it can kind of like get out of its own way, but it doesn't do it in this sense of like fear or urgency. It's just like on a different wavelength and timeline. And so it's able to just kind of like keep doing its thing in the world and stay really protected in that light and in that joy. And then it also came with like a lot of beautiful, good luck, good fortune. They said when like a hummingbird enters into your house, you know that beautiful blessings are on the way. And then another teaching from a lineage, I don't remember which one it was. I believe it's from like either Mexico or Guatemala, but they speak to hummingbird medicine as the medicine of a time traveler as well, because it's the only bird that can fly backwards and forwards. And I do a lot of crazy, weird time travel in my life. And so when I learned that, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. And so just like your Substack being Hummingbird Wisdom, I was like, I feel there's something here. And I started getting deep into your writing and learning more about the work that you do, and was just like, wow, this woman is really incredible. And so I reached out, asked if you wanted to come onto the show, and you were open and willing to come and share. And so I'm feeling really grateful and excited to connect with you. You did the innate postpartum care training with Rochelle Saliga, who's also been a guest on the show last year. And I'm in the midst of it. I'm like in the midway point. And so before we got on to record, you were speaking to like all of the integration work that has been happening after leaving that container, particularly in regard to like the in-person work that you're doing in your community. And so that also feels so special to see a woman who's gone through that container, and to see how she's really infusing that work into the world is deeply inspiring. So all of that is to say, I'm a really big fan of your work. I'm really excited to see what unfolds with the conversation. And yeah, I'd love to just give you some space now to speak to your path, your work, what you're orienting towards in this life, all your offerings, all that good stuff.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for all of the kind words. It really means a lot to me because Substack has just been I'm always like, is anybody reading this? Because I don't really have that many subscribers or like really like push my writing or anything, but it's been a goal the whole time to really like embody my writing and embody myself as a writer because I've always loved writing. And I think that even I did want to share a quick little story about how Hummingbird Wisdom even came to be the name of my Substack. I was a little girl, I don't know how old I was, maybe like 10, and I was working with this individual that was an adult, and she was guiding me through this process of telling a story about my life. And so every time I would see her, we would work on this. We had this big notepad, like, like the big white ones, just a big blank notepad. And every time I went, we would work on like a page or two at a time, and we would talk about, this story of my life. And the characters were hummingbirds. And I don't know why. I can remember what they looked like. It was like bright fuchsia with green. And I had like drawn this hummingbird, and there was this whole thing. And for a little while in my life, I didn't write as much. I would write like in school and excel in writing classes, but never, like was doing it on my own time at that stage of my life because I was probably thinking I was too cool. I don't know. And I shortly fell back into writing, probably when I was like 20. Yeah. So it's been a solid 10 years of just like fostering that relationship. So I always am writing every day. Most of the time, I'm writing in a journal or in my phone in some fashion. And so using the Substack was a place like, okay, now let's like put something out there and allow other people to read it because it is very vulnerable, it's your own inner thoughts. And so a lot of the times when I do put my um essays out, I am just literally writing them, maybe proofing it, like making sure there's no major, grammar or spelling that needs fixed. But then I'm just like sending it out there. And then later I'll go back and read it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, great. And I don't know, it's just been interesting because it feels very private to me because I don't think a lot of people are reading it. And then I get surprised by somebody like you who's like, yeah, I really like what you write. I'm like, wow, that's cool. So thank you for drawing that to my attention. I really appreciate that. But yeah, a little bit about what I do. I have my hands in my life all of the time. I have a lot going on. I have two little kids. I have a daughter that's 5 and a son that's going to be 2 at the end of September. And I was actually 1 week postpartum when I started Innate with Rochelle. So I'm going on like being, yeah, he's going to be 2. So I'm on like the full, like we're on the full postpartum journey together, me and Innate, as I was taking it. And if you're familiar with Rochelle's work, you know that she talks about the innate training as being like the gestation period. And then there's a full 9 months afterwards of that integration. And it continues on. And I think one of the things that she highlights so much about is making sure that her practitioners are informed with her material and then also trusting and understanding that each woman is going to bring forward that work in the way that feels best for her and for what is calling to her. And so I've been in this process not only of being postpartum with my second child, but then also kind of redefining what, my contribution to that work does look like, in a real setting. I'm actually getting ready to take on like my first real postpartum client here in a couple of months. I'm always doing some kind of birth or postpartum care just in community. Um, you know, Multiple times throughout the year. Anytime I come into contact with a woman, I just am very intentional about making sure that that woman is supported to some extent, especially if they ask me to be there. So, again, if you're familiar with Rochelle's work, she also believes it's very important to be compensated for the work that we are doing and providing. And that's one thing that for me has always been a little bit challenging in making that shift more towards an entrepreneur lifestyle is what is my worth? How much do I want to be charged? Or how much do I charge for my services rather? And what are my services? It's just this constant dance and unfolding for me that I have slowly over the last 10 years been able to refine. And then having my second child kind of kicked me into a little bit more of that career pause, still working part-time, still taking on contracts, still, having this part of me that wants to make money, that loves creative projects, and I have a lot of passion for many different things in my life. So still that, but then also like being at home with the kids more and knowing that I'm wanting to make this my focus, but then figuring out how to do that in a sustainable way and also, care for community. it's constantly unfolding for me. But I have a company called Native Women's Wellness Movement. We focus on utilizing intergenerational healing practices to create change for anyone that we come into contact with. So I have a few different curriculums that I offer, one of them being a stress management curriculum. I was just in Spokane a couple of months ago working with the tribes up there on, just increasing self-care. It was a 2-day workshop. We did some breath work, we did meditation, we did hands-on practices. We went through Native women's wellness movements for pillars and just spent time together really to give people the space to go within. And that's a lot of the work that I do, whether it be with birth and postpartum or even just a meditation class. It's really this time to facilitate an opportunity for change and for healing. And so my role in my family and in my life is very much that generational cycle breaker. You know, words, that's the term that I think that a lot of us nowadays, especially who are raising children, we feel that very intensely. I think every parent at some point feels that we're meant to evolve, our children are meant to evolve us, and we want our children to be better than we are, right? That's the whole goal. So my mom had me really young. It was really important for me that I go to college and I get an education and do the whole thing and set myself up for success. And I had my first daughter when I was 25. And it was even, years before that I knew I would be doing things differently when it came time for me to bring my child into the world. So it's been a journey of 30 years of just constantly unfolding. I feel like every day I'm learning from my kids. They're teaching me about myself more. And I am just in deep gratitude every day for the life that I get to live, being an Indigenous person who's living in my community, who gets to be with the land and who gets to have the space to not be in survival. I thrive in the life that I live, and I am always living from that space and wanting that for other people, wanting them to know that living in love and joy and happiness and health is possible, and that it's your right to be able to do that. And so that's a little bit about me and where I kind of live from right now at this time. I haven't done an interview in quite a while. So it's interesting, like before what I would have said about myself, even just a few years ago, to now just like being able to come into this present moment and be with everything that has been shaping me, especially since bringing my second child into the world and just letting him teach me too, going from just having a daughter and having a son and having that energy in the household and raising young children is so beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you for like a good overview of just like so many parts of your path. And I am curious, so are you currently living like on your people's land?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Nice.
I was
And
born and raised like always living in my community. So I left home for a little bit between like 2020. I left home. I moved back home when I was 22, but I was living like 45 minutes away from the res. So not like I was working on the res. I was with my family a lot, but then I like had space, and then I moved back all the way home when I was 25, when I had my daughter, is when we like fully landed here. We have a sweet little 4-acre property with a garden and farm and horses, and the river is our backyard. I mean, it's truly like heaven on earth. I feel it's my heaven on earth for sure, of just getting to be here and again just be in that space of thriving life, right? Like being in a place where I'm not working for survival, I'm working for pleasure, I'm working for joy. And I mean, I work a lot still, I feel like, but regardless, it's it's a privilege and it's a luxury, especially in the community that I come from, to be able to have put myself in a place where I can live my life like this. I mean, these are things that I set myself up for a long time ago. I mean, that was my intention. It was always my intention when I was in college that I would be working for myself in some fashion or form, that this would be, I would be doing something different than the mainstream. So to be this year since turning 30 has like really been that reckoning with myself of being like, okay, so like what's next? Because you've checked all the boxes. You have everything that you so, like called in or that you wanted, like you have those things now. So one, receiving it, being happy with it, having gratitude for it. And also, yeah, so like what's the next 10 years look like? What are those, how much more can I expand? How much more expansive can I become? And like this, if this is where I am now, how can I continue to open my heart even more?
I can't count the number of women who have told me that they want to transition off of birth control, but they don't know where to start. They're scared, they're vulnerable, and they don't know where to get accurate evidence-based information. I feel these women's pain because I too was once in their shoes. I transitioned off of hormonal birth control at age 20 after being on the pill for 4.5 years. I didn't do any preparation, I didn't do any research, I just quit the pills cold turkey and got a copper IUD inserted a few months later. What happened over the next 6 years of my life was a complete and total shit show. I struggled with acne that was so bad that I ended up on spironolactone, doxycycline, Accutane, and every single topical that you could think of. My weight went through super intense fluctuations that made zero sense. My cramps were so painful that I couldn't get out of bed for the first few days of my cycle. I was bleeding through my clothes. My emotions were all over the place. I had constant headaches, a totally erratic sleep schedule, chronic vaginal infections, and lots of embarrassing bloating. Worst of all, I was entirely disconnected from the seat of my creative power, my womb. Now the thing is, all of this pain, confusion, and disembodiment could have been easily avoided had I known then what I know now about female hormonal health and sacred womb reverence. Now, after years of healing my own relationship with my cycle, my fertility, and my sovereign right to prevent pregnancy without the use of hormonal contraceptives and IUDs, I have a lot of hard-earned wisdom to share with you all. The truth is that I didn't have a doctor to educate me on the medical side of this massive transition, and I didn't have a wise woman to midwife me through the spiritual side of this massive transition. But I figured out how to reclaim this biological and spiritual education for myself, and now I can offer it to other sisters who are seeking guidance and support. This journey of deep self-healing and womb liberation is what inspired my upcoming online group class, the Natural Birth Control Series. Together, we will dive into the physiologic brilliance of female fertility by interweaving the clinical facts and the mystical wisdom that all of our great-great-great-grandmothers once walked with. We will be reclaiming our womb sovereignty together in ceremony, in community, in the way that women have been doing since the beginning of time. Classes will be held on Zoom from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the first 3 Sundays of October, with class recordings available for anyone who is unable to attend live. Our first class on October 5th will be focused on how to transition off of hormonal birth control and IUDs. Our second class on October 12th will be focused on intuiting our body's biological fertility signals. And our third class on October 19th will be focused on plants for pregnancy prevention and conscious contraception. The Natural Birth Control Series is open to women of all ages and life phases, including women in their fertile childbearing years, along with mothers, grandmothers, and aunties who want to help educate and support the young women in their lives. The Natural Birth Control Series is being offered for $33, which gives you access to all 3 classes and recordings, along with my extensive resource guide to support you on your womb sovereignty journey. To learn more about the program, you can visit the link in the show notes. Looking forward to seeing you in class. Beautiful, yeah, and it doesn't surprise me that your birth and your daughter brought you back home to your community. It doesn't surprise me at all. One of my dear friends, Amma Fujinami, who was on the podcast a few months ago, she comes from Apache lineage on her father's side of the family. And when she was in her like big birth portal, and like her preconception phase, and also like trying to figure out who her baby daddy was going to be, who her husband, like the man who she was going to build a family constellation with, it brought her to Taos, New Mexico, which is where so much of her ancestry is from. And it's so interesting. I really do feel like our children's souls are absolutely guiding us location wise. Like they are telling us this is actually where our family is meant to be. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that your daughter was like, we're going back to the res.
So crazy because she was actually born in that other place that I was talking about that's about 45 minutes from the res, but it's actually where my Cayuse lineage comes from, is in that place. So it's no longer the reservation, quote unquote, today. However, it is our usual and accustomed land. And so I always love that it's so special that she was born there. And then my son was actually born on the res, like at here at home, but I had him outside and it was like 11:30 a.m. Like the rain was just like lightly drizzling. He was born at the end of September. It's just this like gorgeous day and I'm just like only been in labor for 6 hours. It was such a different experience than my first birth, which I think is really common just because you have to go over the hurdle of like, this is my first time having a baby. What's happening here? You know, all these things are going to happen, but then while it's happening, you're like, oh, this is a lot. So I was in labor for way longer with my first child. And then the second one was, it felt like such a breeze, but I did go 9 days past my due date. So I was like in this very long, end period of like, okay, this baby's going to come. He's gonna come, he's gonna come. So the moment that it hit, I was like, it's game on. Like this baby's coming out as soon as possible. So it was so wonderful.
I love too that your daughter was born on land that isn't like federally recognized as indigenous land, and she was like, fuck that. I know where my land is. I love that. Yeah, and I feel like that's a common theme with mothers is like first birth is your initiation into motherhood, and every birth is very different. I know some women who have had like super chill first births, very quick, like total breeze, and then I know women who have like, yeah, 3, 4 day long labors, like long process, and whatever the birth portal looks like for you, like that is what your initiation into motherhood is meant to be. I am curious, like growing up on the res, what was the birth culture like when you were growing up? And what did you see about birth in your own community? And then what shifted things for you? Like, why did you go from maybe what you had seen or had experienced into having a really clear knowing of like home birth is the only path for me?
Yeah, so I grew up around, I'm the oldest sibling in my family and like the oldest cousin too, on both my dad and my mom's side. So I was always around babies my whole life. My mom was an early childhood care provider and still is. She has been since I was like 5 years old. So 25 years. And she used to work in the infant room. So I was always around babies. And my mom is I mean, I am a lot of the way I am because of who my mom is. And I mentioned earlier that she's a generator. And so I'm a projector. And so I'm like, I was raised with a generator mother. She has a lot of energy and she is such a caretaker. She has such a big heart. And she also deeply, you know, carries her role and responsibility as a woman in the community and making sure that she's supportive for families and children. We always have had people, like sleeping at our house. My mom and dad have always taken in families, children, anytime anybody was needed. So growing up, it wasn't uncommon for us to have a friend or a cousin or an uncle or somebody staying with us. And it was always just explained to us, like it's important for us to take care of each other. And this is how we do that sometimes. And so I grew up with that. And my mom, she develops wonderful relationships with women in her life. And she is very kind spirited. And I just keep saying that because her soul is so gentle. It's just this gentle, calm spirit that so many of us need. And I'm so grateful to be her daughter and to have that because I'm an Aries too. So I'm just like, a lot of the time. So her spirit has always just been so calming to me, to be her daughter. And so to get to see that growing up in the way that she would have relationships with other women, it wasn't uncommon for her to be at a birth with a mom or to be dropping off dinner or to go check on somebody or to do their dishes. I always grew up with that. And a lot of times we were just kind of toted along. And so that's, when it comes to babies and moms and all of those things, that was really fostered for me, between 5 and 10. I saw a lot of that. And then I also would be going to births with her, for some of our relatives. I actually was just at a birth a few months ago she was my little cousin. But I was there when she was born. Like I was a little girl when she was born and I was at her birth and then I was at the birth of her daughter. And so I was just like, and her grandma is now passed. And so there was just like, there's so much emotion and energy that goes into that. But these are like very real life moments and connections with family. And most of us are related to each other in some way or another. If not, it's just a very small community. So I grew up just seeing my mom have that demeanor in the community, and she still does. She's always doing a lot. And also with that, it really inspired me to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, because as much as my mom gives, sometimes she doesn't always pour back into her. And I think now she's so much more mindful of that. Also, most of her children are raised. My youngest brother is 18. So she's shifting, into this new phase of her life. And I've been watching her do that even since becoming a grandma and, having that initiation for her. Both of us going through these initiations of me becoming a mom and her becoming a grandma. That's happening simultaneously. And I think sometimes we might forget that when it comes to motherhood that like you do need those relationships in your life, and it does change things. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. So after, just that's kind of like the vibe of my childhood and my life. And so I always I would, in high school, I was like friends that I knew that were having babies in high school, I was like going to visit them after they had their baby, like just very innately have always been called to birth. I actually remember precisely being 8 years old at a baby shower and holding an infant and looking at him and being like, yeah, like this is my life. Like I just kind of knew that this was my path, I guess, was to work with families, to work with the family, in multiple capacities, just like you're saying about the midwife. And wanted to highlight that too. As much as, my mom or I may be at births, our family also does a lot of caretaking during the time of death. And our family supports a lot of our funeral ceremonies with cooking meals and our traditional meals for our ceremonies. So also being just as much as I'm around birth, also grew up around death a lot. I started going to funerals when I was like 10 years old. I couldn't even tell you how many funerals I've been to. I was just at a funeral a few weeks ago. I didn't even know the person, but I knew her grandkids. And I was like, shoot, like I have a grandma, I have a grandpa. Like I'm going to be them at some point. And that's one of the things in my community when I'm going to funerals and going to ceremonies. It's a very humbling and ground zero experience and process, because no matter what, I'm going to be in their shoes at some point. My mom's going to die someday and I'm going to be in that space. So what does that like? I'm just always thinking about, especially in those are some of the most sacred moments of our lives, of what love and support do you have accessible to you, because that can be extremely detrimental or extremely beneficial. It can guide you on a different path either way, depending on what your support system looks like. So I just have always been in that continuum of understanding birth and death go together. We were raised that way. We were raised in our culture. And so there's an understanding of the reciprocity that you give and you take, you give and you take. And as I went into, I thought that I would like for reals be a teacher. Like I'm going to go be an elementary school teacher. I have a lot of other teachers in my life. And that's kind of how, when I went into college, I went on that path, and then I shifted and actually got my bachelor's degree in human development and family science with a focus in child development. And so really what that did was expose me to a lot of different methodologies and theories around community and what does it mean to create a thriving community and a thriving person. So I started to understand myself on a completely different level at that point and started analyzing my community from a different standpoint. And that's also still when I was very much living from a more quote unquote, I don't love this word, but colonized mindset of just that like Western thought process. And so when I started to go through some of these different classes and was thinking about myself and my life and my community and past versus present, what my community wasn't always toxic, my community wasn't always unhealthy, my community wasn't like, this is actually how we are. And being somebody who's always been very in touch spiritually and open to that part of me, I have always felt that pull of like, this isn't how we operate. This isn't how we're supposed to operate. And also just being an Indigenous person who's going from, sometimes I'm at a funeral on a Tuesday night and the next day I'm waking up mothering my children and, we're doing other things. So it's like going from that ceremonial experience to modern world experience is constantly a dance between the past and the present as an Indigenous person, and feeling how whole and full you can feel as an Indigenous person, and then having to shift and live in that other world, as our ancestors talk about, is having to live in two worlds. And so it's always been a teacher for me in that sense. Fast forward, I finished college, I come home, I start working in alcohol and drug prevention. I'm like putting on events in the community, working for our local tribal health clinic. And I think I was in that job for about a year. It was great work. I loved doing it. I had the energy for it. I didn't have kids. I had like optimal, what I call anti-energy. It's so needed in every mom's life, is anti-energy, no matter where. I'm like, I have so many ideas, but I don't have the energy to carry it out. So my friends who aren't mothers yet and carry that anti-energy, I always hold them like precious gems. But I loved that work, and soon, but I really wanted to shift my focus back into early childhood. And so I started working for our maternal and child health department, and I was doing some grant work, doing community events. We were doing some parent education. And then also we were doing home visiting and supporting folks who were birthing or needing some of that extra support postpartum. But it was more like structured curriculum work, not necessarily like the work that I do now. It definitely was a foundation in building and knowing what I'm capable of doing now, but a very Western process at that time. And I also was sent to a training that was a peer breastfeeding support training that was tribally adapted, and it was done up in northern Washington. And it was in that moment when I was learning from Dolores Backus that I was like, wow, I had no idea that Black and brown women were actually treated differently in the hospital. And she was throwing out all of these facts and data and stories, clients and all this stuff. And I was just like, okay, so I'm not having a baby in a hospital. I'm going to be home. Like, I'm going to be doing a home birth. And at that training, we also got to learn from a tribal member who it was also from northern Washington, and she was talking to us a lot about herbs. So we were making teas and lactation cookies, and she was talking about flower essences. And that was one of the first times when it came to like birth and postpartum that I had ever heard anybody talk about any of those things or knew that it was available. And I was also simultaneously like balancing my hormones. I got off birth control. So there was a big shift in my demeanor. I wasn't at that time thinking about conceiving, but I knew that I would want to in the next few years, but not really like dead set on like I'm having a baby. And I didn't end up getting pregnant for another 2 years after that. And I always just think it's so crazy how much my daughter guided even more so this process for me of diving deeper into understanding the woman's body, understanding the importance of women's work, and needing to carry that on into the next generation, but really come into the awareness of our own bodies and our own power and sovereignty as women, and the power that we do carry. So it's been overwhelmingly joyful in that process, and also has brought me to my knees on multiple occasions. I'm constantly surrendering to my path and to what I am doing next. And I think for the last year, really, I've kind of just been like, yeah, I have no idea where my career is going next or what my role even in community looks like, because I have been in that postpartum period of that first 2 years again. And it's like, the time is not necessarily for me to be as outward. It's for me to be inward. And I've still done a lot of outward work. I've gotten to rein in quite a bit, but I just now, especially, I think it's so beautiful too, that I am coming up like right on that 2 year mark, that things are starting to solidify. I can see where all of the exposure and the lessons and the teachings that I've had over these last 5 years has brought me to this point now where it's like, yes, okay, now you've gone through this process and now you're going to be able to teach from there.
Oof. So much good stuff that you just touched on. Wow. I mean, one thing that I'm thinking about a lot in terms of kind of like synthesizing everything you just said was how deeply my perspective of like what womanhood actually is. And particularly when I was living in the jungle and looking at my elders, understanding what the medicine woman's path is when I was looking at the grandmothers in the community. And it took me a long time to understand it and to really like realize it because I was in a way like putting them side to side with like the medicine men, like the taitas, the shamans, versus like the grandmothers and the abuelas and the medicine women, and just kind of seeing like they have really, really different paths and really different initiations. And what I finally kind of realized was that the women essentially all of their initiations that they had to go through to get to a point where they were really recognized as a true elder in their community, as a medicine woman, as someone that the children could go to and learn from, as someone that younger people who were in their like matrescence portal, their mothering years, that they could go to an elder, to a grandmother, and to speak to. Her whole initiation was actually like her shift from maiden into mother and then mother into grandmother. Kind of what you were speaking to in the way of like your own shift from maidenhood into motherhood and then watching your mother shift from mother into grandmother. And just all of the unpaid emotional labor that women are doing all the time, of what you spoke to, of like we were just around births. We would just show up with food. We would just go and help clean people's houses. We would just be present at the funerals. Like none of this was necessarily like a solidified, codified profession that we were charging services for, and we had a clear website and like all this stuff, right? And it's something that I just think about a lot in terms of my path and the way in which I do want to share. And I'm hearing and picking up on a lot of yeah, the strange kind of trying to fit all of that medicine into some kind of like clear, cohesive box with like, what do I offer the world? And how do you professionalize this and all of that kind of stuff? Because the weight of a woman's medicine is like incalculable. Like you can't actually put a price tag on everything that you walk with in terms of like all that you were learning throughout your childhood, just being in the presence of women who were showing up in that way, being in the presence of your mom and how she cared for and stewarded the lives of these beautiful, sweet little children that she was taking care of, right? Like all the work that you did as an Indigenous woman, then leaving your community and being in the more Western, as you said, colonized world, and kind of like unlearning and relearning and resynthesizing what your relationship to womanhood was going to be, coming back into your community and interweaving these kind of Western modalities of what you spoke to, one of like drug and addiction support, or like the peer support with breastfeeding care, learning like the herbs and the recipes and all of that for postpartum and for pregnancy, like bringing all of that into conversation, all of the studies that you did, and then the deep soul curriculum of being like, I'm gonna birth at home. Like knowing that so young, and the medicine of walking with that like really clear knowing of, I, as a brown woman, am absolutely not going to step into the hospital when I give birth. I know the statistics, I know the violence, I know the racism, I know the reality of what's going to occur. And so, like, my spirit is saying, absolutely not. And also the spirit of my child, like being able to time travel so far beyond just yourself and to see your future lineages and to see your past lineages and all of the breakages and ruptures. Like, how do you put a price tag onto any of it, all of that kind of stuff. And so I empathize with you in that conundrum, right? Of like putting the word work behind birth, like it really is a path of service. And then getting money involved, it is confusing, but then also understanding like how do you value everything that you have put into your path, and how do you figure out how to have that reciprocity that you spoke to, of you do give and you do take, and that is the model of life, of giving and receiving and giving and receiving and dying and birthing and dying and birthing. And there has to be some kind of reciprocity there. So yeah, I'm with you on all of that.
Yeah, I have this mantra that came to me several years ago now, but I write it frequently in my journal. And it's, I go where I'm needed and I'm needed where I go. And it helps me because sometimes I start feeling like, am I even on path? Like, am I even where I need to be? And I used to have this auntie who's no longer with us on the earthly plane, but I would call her, and be like, Auntie, like, this is what's going on. Like, or I would have a spiritual experience and I'm like, this is what's going on. And I would want, I would like the earth part of me would like really want her to give me some answers. And she's like, yep, sounds like you're on track. And like, that's all she would say. Like, she's just like, yep, keep singing. Yep, keep doing. Yep, sounds like you're doing the right thing. And I'm like, okay, all right. But that, like just that earthly reassurance was there. And then not having her here anymore and, like having to figure out, so like, how am I going to reassure myself? It's that mantra that just it will replay in my mind. I go where I'm needed and I'm needed where I go. And I mean that like in every moment, I have to think about it in that way because I don't know who I'm going to run into. I don't know, like, especially like in my own community, I don't know who I'm going to run into. And so I try to make sure that in every conversation that I'm having, that it is living prayer, that it is that divine presence. It doesn't even have to be prayer. It is just presence with what's right in front of you and letting yourself hear what the messages are for you. I think it's really important. And it's part of, how I have to justify how I live my life too, because I do have my hands in so many different places all the time. It's the way that I keep myself grounded, because if I don't, then I'm trying to like keep up with the Joneses, for lack of a better word. And it's not healthy for me to live my life that way, which is why I have had to learn how to rein in and work more strategically and differently, and to also have the space and capacity for my children, right? Like, that's what got me to this quote unquote career pause or shift or whatever I want to call it, is that I had a second baby and I was like, this is way too much for me. I can't do up until that point, I was working just a normal 40-hour a week job in early childhood, loving it, doing great. And then I would get home and I was just absolutely spent. And this is not sustainable for me. Simultaneously taking an 8. So I'm learning, all of these different things. And I'm like, this is not it. This is not happening. I'm completely overwhelmed. My family's getting the worst of me, essentially. My partner's getting the worst of me. All of my energy is going everywhere else. This isn't sustainable. And so, since doing that, and I'm so grateful to have a partner who is able to show up for me in this way and who is willing to provide that support financially, more than I am able to give in that sense right now, because my energy is on our children. And I just appreciate being able to be in a dynamic where that's respected, and that's a baseline for us right now. And I always just have to highlight how much of a luxury and a privilege that is in today's world, because I know that where I'm at mentally right now is partly because I don't have the pressure of working full time, like normal 9 to 5 gig right now. Does that mean I'm not making money? No, the Aries in me will make sure that everybody knows I love to make my own money. I love creative projects, but I think that that's what also just keeps coming back to me during this conversation, is that we can talk about the medicine woman and all of those things. And also, the reason why we do have such a hard time putting a price tag on all of this is because it's information that every woman should have. And that's part of the grief dance that I play again, and that I played with so much while taking an A and finishing an AITS training, because I just got so sad that, like, wow, I have all of this information, and now what? And now how do I put this in the hands of others in a good way and make sure that this is available, and also not put all of the weight on my back? because that's where it starts to get heavy. And I don't want this work to feel heavy.
Yes, I feel that so deep, and my own profound grief process. I would say probably over the past like 4.5 years, mostly since I've started my path with the medicine of Jahe. For the people who maybe don't know my podcast, like I started walking a path with the Colombian brew of ayahuasca when I was 24. Lived in the jungle for like a year and a half with my elders, went very deep with that. And I would say since 24, the grief process that has been unearthed starting in my womb space around like all of the lack of education that I received about my own body, about my own fertility, about being in right relationship with sexuality, about what like my true power is as a woman, what fertility looks like in my body, where my creativity comes from, all of that. Like as I was learning all of this, both through a lot of deep self-study within like the Western paradigm, all the crazy purging that I did within ceremony, all of the information that I received from my Indigenous elder teachers, like the joy that came through with that is insurmountable, like it's incalculable. And the grief is just as large. It is just as large. And it's something that I think about a lot about like when I was living in the jungle and I was deep in all of this medicine of the womb. And I was going through all of this and I was writing a ton. And I had all these people in the village being like, what are you writing about? Like, why are you always on your computer just typing away and writing? What are you writing? And I told them, I was like, yeah, I'm writing a bunch of womb care guides, like all about how to work with plants and vaginal steams and this and that, and learning how to track your cycle and all of this. And it was so funny because the people in the village, they like looked at me and one of them was like, oh, I didn't know that you were a partera, which is a midwife. And I looked back, I was like, I'm not a midwife. What do you mean? What is a partera? I didn't even know that word. And they were like, yo, it's the woman who like teaches all of the girls in the village about all this stuff. And I was like, that's not what I'm doing. And now, years later on my path, I'm like, oh, that was what I'm doing. And also, I didn't get into this to like be that person. I got into this because I wanted to understand all of this in my own body. And the fact that other women don't have access to this in the way that you were speaking to, like that this wasn't just naturally passed on to us from our mothers, from our grandmothers, from our older cousins, from our aunties, like the grief of that is the fuel for my fire, which is a really hard thing. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to transform that grief medicine and to say, like, what am I going to do with this actually? And so I am curious, like, do you feel like in your community that that was also lost? I know that in my lineage, it was very much lost. I'm curious from your perspective where any fracturing occurred and what you're seeing within the different generations in your community.
I'm glad you brought this back up because when you were talking, I was like, oh, I left a big part out of my story that is very pertinent to what we're talking about. And that's that when I was working in that maternal and child health department for our tribal health center, we were working on a grant project that was called iLaunch, Indigenous Linking Actions for Children's Health. I think that's what it stands for. I might have missed, I don't know. It's a long acronym. But regardless, it was a federal grant that was put out to essentially evaluate the prenatal and postpartum care of the community. And it was a systems level grant. So we were focusing on getting into the system to implement more supportive structures for prenatal and postpartum services. I only worked on it for a short period of time, but at that time, and after going to that breastfeeding training, it really started to unearth in me like, oh, what is the local knowledge? Like, what is the local stories? What are the local songs? Like, where are they? And so, as part of that grant, we organized a focus group. We called on, certain elders in the community. I think we put an open call out, like, if you have birth knowledge, postpartum, da 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 da, protocols, practices, etc. Because I feel like at least this is a biased experience, but it's biased in more than one way. Because you have to remember that when you're talking about Indigenous people, you're talking about indigenous people as a collective, you're talking about tribes individually, and then you're talking about bands, and then you're talking about families. And so within each one of those levels are different customs and protocols that would be specific to a family or band or tribe, whether that be the language, songs, protocols. I mean, where I live, my reservation is the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and that also includes the Walla Walla people and the Cayuse people. Those are three different tribes that lived in different areas of the region. And then we were all brought together onto one, like into one place. So we didn't always live as like big communities like that. And so there can be a lot of differences. So, anyways, side note, sorry, felt like that was important. um, we bring together this group of people, and I'm like asking questions. I'm trying to like unearth this knowledge, and I'm getting like very little information. Very little information. I'm like, okay, so like, and they're good stuff, like great things that maybe some families wouldn't know. I was raised, I feel like, very culturally intact with our practices as a family, and so I was really wanting like specific songs that were sang at birth. You know, like I'm like, but what are these things? Where are they? I know they were there. Like you want to say, like we have all these practices for death, but then what do we have for birth? Because in my community now, everybody's birthing in the hospital. We don't even have any like home birth midwives that serve our area. So, you know, there's that. There's that I've just that I've had to grieve over, that this was something that our people did for time immemorial, and it stopped not that long ago, you know, like 100 years ago. My grandpa was born, you know, like there was people not that far back that were born at home, and then there's this gap. So at that same time, I actually am talking to one of my aunts, and I find out that my great grandmother's mother was one of our last traditional midwives. And I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. Okay, I understand why this isn't like so off. Like it felt off par for me at that time to like really dive into birth knowledge and like all of this stuff. I was like, what's going on? Like this feels like it's taking me in a different way. And I was like, oh, okay, it's like the lineage, my DNA is it's coming out in me again. And you know, and I think that I have that understanding about myself in many different ways. I also am a song carrier. And so, especially in this last year, I've been not really asked, forced to bring out songs in different ceremonies. And as a young person and as a woman, it feels absolutely terrifying in those moments. And so, there's been time after time after time over this last year where I'm called on to bring that forward. And I have to accept that like this isn't my choice and also understand, oh, this is why I'm so boundaried with my time. Oh, this is why I'm so boundaried with the people that I put myself around. You know, having those different understandings is because my lineage is calling it out in me. It's not, you know, like it's not just this passion. Like, no, it's very real and deeply ingrained in my bones. And so again, coming from that place of like privilege and luxury where I'm just like, how blessed am I? I've run into that so much, even just being an Indigenous person who's living on the land that they're from, right? Like so many Indigenous people are removed from their land, even if it's like, it could be all the way across the country, or it could just be a little ways away, or they just grew up in a city, right? Like we have this term of urban natives, and then like you have your res natives. Like there's a difference between those two realities and how you grow up as an urban person and a rural person. So I think that it's so important to think about your passions and your the things that are lighting you up, and think about how that can connect to your lineage, because it is true. Like there's so many things, especially as women, where these were once inherent. Like this was just normal. And in a lot of ways, like obviously, you know, like with the work that my mom's done her whole life, like it still has been running through her, but I just brought it forward to another level, you know. And then my daughter is the one that's like, no, we're having a birth at home, mom. Like we're not going to the hospital. Like there was absolutely no, I mean, like she was so specific, and it was actually really crazy because she was born in 2020, like 3 months into the pandemic. And I was like, that whole time had been planning a home birth. So I was just like, wow, great for me. Like this worked out so well. But it was like during that time where I was like, wow, I'm really for lack of a better word, not in control with this process and the way that this soul is coming forward. And I continue to experience that with her now going into like kindergarten age. And it's the conversation of, are we doing public school or are we not? And right now we're choosing not to, and we're going to do homeschool, and we're gearing up for that. And I have an education background. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to be able to do it, but I'm still like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but it's giving our family that availability to really sink deeper into our rhythms and the way that we actually want to live our life. And I think that that's so beautiful. And that's something that I've prayed for my entire life, is to just get to live from this space, to like be at home with my family. It's so important to me to spend time with my children, right? Like that's one of the biggest things for me that feels so alarming with the model of public school that we have in our community, at least, where it's like you're away from your kids for 40 hours a week. And for my daughter, that pace, she's a projector too. So that pace was not it for her energy. And so again, like listening to that dance between like, what's my child needing and how do we find a better homeostasis so that her energy isn't just spent because she's had to be away from her caregivers this whole time. So it's always this dyad between the both and, right? Like it's an open conversation between her and I. Like, say we go 3 months into homeschool and we're like, this is not it. Like, let's go to school. All right, great, let's go to school. Like there's this respect that I have for my children and the way that they're my teachers. And I think that that's, the most humbling experience about being a mother. And I think about that for my own mom sometimes. Like she just has this wild Aries that's like so extreme in some way, like I'm very vocal about things. And especially, like when it comes to birth and women's health, it can be very controversial, especially because we are so indoctrinated to the current Western medical system right now. And the sad part that comes into that is that it wasn't that way for our people all the time. And those are the conversations, because of my work in healthcare, or even just like going to the health clinic for prenatal services. I'm like, do you understand that the system wasn't designed for my people? Do you get that? Like those are the kinds of conversations that I'm having with providers when I go into my local health clinic, because they don't always know that. They're not in tune with that. This is not like, this is one of our most sacred times. And do you understand that the ceremony has been taken completely out of that? And what are we doing to make sure that that's back?
Oof, yeah. Yeah, so much that I want to touch on there. I mean, something that I think about a lot was like something I think about often, actually, is the different histories throughout the so-called Americas and the timelines of colonization and what has happened. Because when I was living in the jungle, my two elders, Abuelo Kerwin and Abuela Maria, were like pura selva, like born in the jungle, very far away from any kind of westernization, colonization, modernization. They did go through various indoctrination processes throughout their very long lives. There were still missionary schools in their villages. My teacher, Abuelo Kerwin, went maybe for 1 year. He learned to read and then he was like out, did his own thing. And so they did have overlap with colonization, not in the way that has happened in the North more on Turtle Island. And it is something that I think about a lot in terms of you were speaking to like, okay, maybe in the past 100 years, birth has been like taken out of the home and been put into the hospital system within your people's lineage and traditions. And then I think about when I was in the jungle and like the majority of the grandmothers, when I would ask them about their births, they were like, I gave birth in the jungle. I gave birth in the mountains over there. I had 8 babies, alone, essentially like free births. Like they didn't even really have midwives around. They had their mother present, they had their older sisters or their aunties, but that was very normal to them. And then I asked about the women who were kind of like more my generation, like women who were in their 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s about their births. And they said to me, they were like, all of us birth in the hospital. And I was like, why? Do you all birth in the hospital? Like you do everything else outside of the hospital. You guys don't ever go into the hospital for any other health needs. Why would you go for birth there? And they said because there's no more midwives. And I was like, how are there no more midwives? Like, it was a genuine question. I was like, I literally don't understand that. How are there no midwives in your community? There's so many medicine men, there's so many really powerful grandmothers. What happened to all of your midwives? And the response that I got every time was like, ya se acabaron, which is just like, they're gone. They don't exist. And it was deeply shocking to me and brought like profound grief when I heard so many elders speak to that. Like, our midwives are extinct at this point on this in this part of the territory. Like, if you go to Ecuador, yeah, there's still parteras, there's still midwives there, but like here, no, we don't have them. And then I would listen to the women's stories of when they were giving birth in the hospital, because in Colombia, you always get a C-section essentially when you go to birth. And so all the women are having C-section births, they're having highly medicalized births, women just having horrendous birth trauma stories telling me, and me just like, holy shit, like, oh my God, you guys. And luckily, those women do still have so much of their traditional ceremonies intact. And so they do have their medicines, they do have their songs, they do have so many ceremonial spaces where they can go in and be cared for and held and process their birth trauma. And still, there were women who, like 8 years out of their birth, would tell me their stories. And it was clearly still very, very deep in their spirit. And it brought so much up for me just in terms of like, wow, okay, I'm seeing the shift of what happens in a community in one single generation of what happens when you take birth out of the home. And then I'm thinking about my own lineage of, I know that there's at least, let's see, my great grandma, my grandma, my mother. So at least three generations of women who all birthed in very violent hospital settings. And then I think about like the entirety of my own lineage and what we were before we ended up coming over to the so-called United States and being in this colonizer role, what was happening to my people in Europe as they were going through their own Roman colonization, their own being like Christianized, Catholicized, all of that kind of stuff, and tapping into like my elders of elders of elders and recognizing that like you said something of like, this system doesn't work for my people. And as you said, I was like, this system doesn't work for anyone's people. Like, there is no people on the planet who this birth culture, which I would honestly say is like a death culture, something that Rochelle speaks to a lot. This is not how any of us were ever supposed to bring life into the world. It's also not how any of us were ever supposed to die. You spoke so beautifully and eloquently about the death processes and the death rites and the death ceremonies that your people have. And that was my big shift when I was living in the jungle and essentially midwifing my elders through their dying portals. That was what brought me into the understanding of what midwifery actually is. I feel like that was my first initiation of like, birth work is death work. And the way in which people are dying in hospitals and the way in which people are birthing in hospitals, it's like birthing and dying in captivity, truly. And so, so much of that, yeah, is like very, very deeply ingrained into my own ethos. And something that you were speaking to, a beautiful thread, is like choosing to bring birth back into the home is also so deeply interlinked to your like very deep sovereign choice to bring motherhood into the home, like back into the home, like to say, like, I will be at home with my young children. I will be deeply involved in their education. I will make very different choices here, right? Like, all of your motherhood journey is deeply aligned with that choice to say, I'm going to bring birth back into the home in the way that my peoples always did, except for the past couple generations, the past 100 years. Like, this is my birthright as a mother. This is my birthright as a woman. This is my birthright as the matriarch of my family. This is what we're doing. And so when I think about the ways in which women are birthing, it's like the whole trajectory for what the rest of their matrescence process is going to look like, and then what kind of an elder they rebirth themselves into when they do shift that wheel into grandmother. And then another thing that's just kind of a side note, but I can definitely empathize with kind of the song carrier, song keeper role. My mother is a beautiful singer, and when I was in the jungle, I don't know what it's like in your people's ceremonies, but in the Kofan lineage, it's pretty much only ever men singing in ceremony. And the amount of like how to say, like the amount of effort that it took for me to get past all of my own blocks of being a woman singing in ceremony was just like, so it was an important part of my process. But having male elders like really push me and like question like why are you not singing in ceremony? Like you carry so many songs. You have to sing. And that part of you that wants to shut down your own voice, that part of you that wants to go quiet, that part of you that's like, no, I don't get to show up in this role. And then having people ask of you, like, no, this is actually part of your work. You have to sing. You have to share your voice. You have to keep these songs moving forward for the next generation. Like, do your work. I think for a lot of women, learning how to use their voice in any capacity, but especially in song, is a really strong medicine. So, yeah, I definitely I feel you on that.
Yeah, my role with song. It's my mom's also a very beautiful singer, and that's where I've learned, a lot of the songs that I sing. And then into my own motherhood, I've started to have new songs come to me, which is its own experience because it's like, am I making this up? Sometimes I'm like, where is this? Okay, like, all right. But then it's very clear later why, those songs will come. But I think I wanted to touch on how, we're speaking so much about hospital birth and home birth. And I think one of the biggest things that it does come back to is that safety and autonomy and sovereignty as a woman in your own body, right? Because one of the reasons that I chose, I felt so comfortable choosing home birth because everybody around me was like, girl, what are you doing? Like, I didn't know anybody. I did not know one person that had a home birth when I made the choice to home birth. My mom's like, okay, well, you're gonna have to be really strong. And I'm like, yep, I'm gonna need you there. Like, see you there, kind of thing. And I couldn't, I just could not see any other option for myself. And I found such a wonderful midwife. And that was when I really started to learn what real, true, informed consent was. I had no idea previously to that what that meant, but she actually, during every appointment, would sit down, talk about interventions, talk about vaccines, talk about, every different thing that would be considered like, here's something I'm giving to you, or here's something I'm offering to you. She would provide the information, verbally from her. She would say, here's a document, here's more links, here's more references. If you want to look more into this, take it, look it over with you and your partner. You guys both sign it, what your choice is, and then I'll get it next time when I see you next. And I was just like, whoa, what is this? Like, this has never been a part of my life. Like, I had only gone to like our health clinic here on the res, really was my biggest exposure to medicine and health. And so that was an absolute game changer for me in understanding like, oh, I actually have a choice. And that means that all y'all have a choice too. And you don't even know that you have a choice. And so what I want to say about that is that every time, and it used to be extremely difficult for me to even talk about my home birth because I had a positive experience. I didn't have anything bad to say about my birth. I didn't have, like it would shut other people down when I would talk about my birth because they had their own experiences and trauma that were from their own births, whether that be their birth with their mother or the birth of their own children. And so there was a time period where I wasn't really talking about it because it was harmful. And I wasn't in a place with my own voice where I felt like I could just own that, right? And like be in that power, just like you're saying. And so it took me time to be able to like really be open and forthright with a lot of this information. This is probably the first time I've actually ever done a podcast like specifically talking about birth, which is really cool. But it's so important and it's so needed. And also recognizing the fact that like whatever way you choose to birth, what's most important is that you feel safe, right? Because that's what got me through my home births was that I knew how to create safety in my body and I knew how to create safety in my environment. And that was what was so enticing to myself and my partner was that, yeah, we want to bring our baby into a calm environment, into our home, into the microbiome of where we're going to be living. We want them to spend time with just us and like close family for a time. And then a lot of that, those boundaries got reinforced because of COVID. And I was like, because I was like a people pleaser. I still am a people pleaser in so many ways, but having that baby forced me into making a lot of decisions that I was having to really have a backbone about with certain people in my life or just different providers or whatever it may be. And so COVID like kind of came in as support for me at that time to like, yeah, you get to really hunker down. And something that I think I also wanted to touch on with that is that the reason this early childhood period for me is so vital and crucial and important to me is because there was a time in my life where I had to spend time away from my mom. And so there were times when I was a 4-year-old girl that was sad who didn't have her mommy. And so this time, and I get to like really get tested in that because my daughter mimics a lot of the same behaviors that I would have and that I was like shunned for when I was away from my mom. So there's healing to be done there because my daughter has the behavior. I might have my reaction and then I get to repair and say, like, mommy's right here. I love you so much, and get to have that real actual moment of like the intergenerational healing where my mom and I, and that wasn't necessarily her fault that we were spending time away from each other, you know? And so getting to reestablish that back into our lineage, although sometimes is very challenging and painful for me, is also very beautiful and healing. And it goes just with what you're saying. It's like, you can't feel joy if you don't feel that grief. And for me, I think that it's always been about acknowledging that. And that's a lot of the work that I do when I teach meditation and breath work, especially the breath work is one, establishing that safety in the body, getting people comfortable with feeling their breath in their body and dropping into a little bit deeper of a state while you're still awake and getting to just feel yourself. Like so many people just don't even feel themselves, their own energy, their own power. Right. And so that's so important. And so it's so important to me because when people walk away from my class, they're changed. Whether they've done breathwork before or not, they come to my class, they use their own breath. All I do is be like, okay, guys, we're going to do this silly breath. Like, you're going to feel really silly when you do this, but like, let's do it. And let's just see what happens. And I'm always amazed. And like, the reason I said sometimes they're 80 when they work with me is because I've had an 80-year-old woman coming to my breathwork classes here in the community who has had a stroke in the past. And so she's also a healer and she's been in the know of a lot of different like quantum level things for a long time. But she is like, I'm working on these pathways. Like, I'm coming to your classes because I'm working on these pathways and strengthening them because I haven't had as much ability to do that on that one side since I've had my stroke. And so to get to hear that from her, you know, after she's done with my class is absolutely, for me, is just like heartwarming, absolute like I have nothing but gratitude because I never know who I'm going to come into contact with when it comes to teaching these practices. I just know that I'm deep in my own practice all the time. And so by being able to be in that space, I'm then able to, you know, share from there, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier too, about like having to be in that grief. But it's so necessary, and it's so necessary for women right now, especially if you are raising young children and you have been in some of those more traumatic settings for your birth where you didn't feel safe, where that safety was robbed from you. And that's where, you know, a lot of like, that's who I'm working with a lot of time is people who did not have safe experiences. I'm so grateful that I've been able to attend births though in the last couple years in hospital, because most of the time, like, I love the midwives and the doulas and the people who are like, I don't go to hospitals anymore. Like, I hope someday I get to say that. But at this point in my community and in my life, like, I don't foresee that happening because where the women are birthing is in the hospital and I can't just leave them. You know, like, that's the reality. Like, if they ask me to be there, like, that means that like deeper self-care for me, like deeper trust for me, deeper grief for me to be able to hold that space. But at least I know that I'm contributing to their safety in that environment, right? So anytime I'm working with anybody, because I never want to bring about shame or hurt onto somebody else because of my own experiences, that's my baseline every single time is, what do you need to feel safe in the environment that you're choosing to birth in? Because that's what we, and also postpartum, right? Which is why I was so attracted to Rochelle's work, because it is that postpartum time that is so important for mothers. She says it over and over again. This time is either detrimental or extremely healing. This time can hurt you or it will change you forever in the best way, right? And that's what I've been able to experience with my births and my postpartum. And that's because of the women and the care providers that I have put around me, right? So sharing that work and that medicine and getting to help mothers and families set those systems up for themselves. Cause like, I can't do all the work, you know, like I I love the idea of me being a generator. I'm not. It's so wonderful, but like my capacity to give is very limited, especially when it comes to one-on-one work. So helping them also establish stronger, more sustainable networks for themselves as time goes on, and being able to readjust, right, as things change, because we're always changing things as mothers, and as women we're always changing in general. So being able to be that for people and be a mirror, be like, all right, well, this is what we're doing now. Like this happened, so now we're shifting. Like I always am like, sleep is always shifting. Like sleep routines in my house are shifting like every 3 months, all the time. Like we're all sleeping really peacefully, and then like something hits, one kid starts growing or whatever, and we need to shift things. So I think just always being open to, again, that continuum of the giving and receiving, right, is so important.
Yeah. I think what you just spoke to is something really important. I think there's a big polarization right now when we're talking about like the free birth movement or bringing birth back into the home, which are all really beautiful things that I'm personally very aligned with. I'm also very lucky and blessed that I've had like years of preparation around all of this and so much unlearning and a lot of deep privilege and blessings to be able to have like unraveled so much of this programming in my own mind. But then to recognize that you have to meet people where they're at and you have to be able to show up for your community in the way that they can show up for themselves as well. Like wherever they are at on their journey, your work is to do exactly what you said, which is cultivate safety in whatever setting possible. To say, okay, I see you. I see where you're at with things. I see that it actually probably would be fairly unsafe for you to birth at home just based on where you're at. Like that would not be the safest option for you. That wouldn't be where you feel the most comfortable. That wouldn't be where you feel maybe even like the most in your power to do this. Like maybe you as a person right now, where you are in your evolution, what you really need is a hospital birth, and what you really need is me beside you, cultivating safety in whatever way that I can. And so I really, really honor and respect that solidity in yourself to say exactly what you said. That means that I just show up with an even stronger backbone. I know that I'm going into a hospital setting where crazy shit will likely happen, can possibly happen, who knows? And at the end of the day, like I'm internally resourced enough in my own power. I'm externally resourced enough in terms of all of my support systems that I can show up in this way. Yeah, there's so much that I could speak to more with that, but I do think it's good for us to kind of start to wrap up. But I would love to give you an opportunity. You have spoken a lot about your kids and how deeply they've brought you into your own medicine as a mother, as a woman, as someone who is holding space for other women in their own healing, the intergenerational work. And so I would love to hear a little bit just about, the difference between mothering a daughter, mothering a son, just your motherhood journey, whatever you want to share about it.
Yes, my children are so wonderful. I just absolutely adore them. Sometimes I have like a meditation that I always bring to mind when I'm putting them to sleep is just the fact that like they're my hearts outside of my body, like there was a time I mentioned that like sleep period, but there was a time recently in this like past 6 months probably where every single night I was just like, brother is like shifting into more of being like a toddler, not as much of a baby. So we're like both like all three laying in bed, one on each side of me, and I'm reading a book, and we just like peacefully fall asleep every night, which is usually like now, like I get over very overstimulated. My daughter gets like we all just kind of like have our things, but during this time I was just having these like precious moments, right? That like I knew I would ache. I know I will ache for them in 30 years of just like these moments of like being in my daughter's bed, us just all cuddled up, peacefully falling asleep, and just that symbiosis, right? Of them, like they grew in my body and now they exist outside of me and with their own quirks and characteristics and pieces of their dad, interweaved in there. And so I, I just, I love how precious they are right now. And there is such a difference between mothering a daughter and a son. And I always, like, this is my little joke that's not like super nice, but it's like I have three younger brothers from my mom, I also have a younger sister that's my dad's daughter, but from my mom, she just has me and then three boys. And so I'm always like, oh, this is why she loves my brothers more than me. Like there's this difference in the way that like my daughter asks the most of me. She makes me rise to the occasion where it's like, yeah, you said this is who you're going to be, so better be it. Like you're asking her not to yell at you, so like probably don't yell at her, or whatever it might be. Like we're 5 now, so the 5-year-old dynamics are kicking in. We've got a lot of independence, we've got a lot of sass, we've got a lot of ideas and imagination, and there's a lot going on. So it's humbling, right, to be in that, and like what is the type of woman I want her to see me be. And that's like I mentioned so much about how much my mother gives and pours from her heart, and then there's that little bit where it's like, yeah, mom, and like pour back into yourself. And that was so much of the inspiration of Native women's wellness movement, where it's like, yeah, and also our women need to be taken care of too. They need to be honored too. They have their role in the community is so high that they should be cared for so diligently. And that's with that honor of that, right? And so for me, when it comes to raising a daughter, it's so important for me to take care of myself, to take time away. Like I was just on a retreat, right, for a few days, and as hard as it is to be away from the home for 4 or 5 days, like I recognize how potent and necessary it is for me for one time of year to go away for 4 days just to like be in my own energy, not make anyone else food, just eat when I'm hungry, shower when I want to shower, do whatever I want. I don't even have to have a schedule, right? But being able to just like sit and reflect. And for me, like this was a 1 year of last year I went to Shasta, this year I went back to Shasta. So getting to go back to the same place and reflect on what did take place this last year. There was very clear pieces of me that I was like, I'm done with this. Like, I can't carry this forward in my motherhood anymore. And one of those was anger and rage. Like I had so much anger and rage come out after having my son and going through the shift of mothering 1 to mothering 2, holding that capacity for me, building that capacity was such a process for me because I was coming to head with my own triggers, my own overstimulation, and then also my own throat chakra of like, yeah, and what do you need to ask for help with? Right? Like that's one of the things that I also see so much when I'm working with moms is like, yeah, it's really easy for us to say what so-and-so isn't doing or what we don't have or what are we not doing, but are you asking for help and are you letting the help be done? Right? Especially I think when it comes to our partners, that's a space where, especially in our modern world, there's this desire for mothers to have it be this 50-50 when it comes to caretaking with our partners. And though I'm saying that it's not possible, what caretaking in early years looks like for a mother and what caretaking looks like for a father in the early years is 2 very different things. And, having acceptance with that takes time in our modern world because a lot of women are expected to work 40 hours a week, do the whole thing, whether that's for survival or because it's a pressure within their relationship, right? So, or they can't let that go, right? Like I had to experience that too when I was absolutely terrified to stop working full time, to lose my benefits, to lose my salary. I mean, like I had worked my way up to like I was making the most money I had been making at all. I was also making money from my business. Like it was going to be a big shift for me to be like, okay, and I'm going to take a step back and trust that I'm going to be taken care of, that I don't have to blow up my life. I don't have to run away, right? Like these were all these shifts that my son is initiating me into, right? Like my daughter, it was like, okay, so what kind of woman are you? And then my son is like, and now let us be taken care of. Like, let us live from your heart, right? Like, and that's been my own process too of having to cultivate deep trust with the masculine. And that's not something that my lineage of women have been able to do in that way in a long time. Like my mom and my grandma, both of them have always worked full time. I don't know what it was like, really going further back from that. But like where it was the same fear when I told people I was home birthing, when I said I'm working part-time, it was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean you're working, part-time? So I think, just having to cultivate that for myself with raising a son has also been like, yeah, I want my son to see me nourished. I want him to see me rested. I want him to see me happy. And like, I want that for both of my kids, right? Obviously, like, what's so important to me is for my children to see me as a joyful mother. And that's part of where I'm at in my own process right now is like, yeah, so let yourself be joyful then. Like, so then be joyful. Like, you have all of these blessings and wonderful things in your life. So be joyful, like, be grateful. And like, as much as I am, in those mundane moments throughout our days as mothers, that like just the repetitive tasks, or like I'm having to stop 5 times while I'm just trying to switch the laundry over, or whatever it might be, it's so easy to get caught up in that resentment and the isolation. And but then again, back to, and what do I need to ask for help for? Like, where do I need more support? What does that look like? How do we refine this as a family? And that's taken time, and I'm sure that it's going to continue to unfold over the coming years, just as our children continue to get older. And I know they start to iron themselves out. Definitely being 2 years out postpartum, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling like, all right, we got a grasp on things. But again, with that, like having the capacity to mother too, like I remember those early days of like going out with both of them by myself, like trying to go do things, or just like go get some air, like being in the truck to just like go for a drive with both of them and just being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I have no idea who I am. Where am I at? Like that space is so, it's just, I want to, you delicate. It's so delicate. It's such a delicate time for just the continuum of the mother baby dyad and the shifting of the family and that polarity. But I think what's been so beautiful to witness is the way that my husband has changed and shifted and really stepped into more of his heart and himself as a father to a son. Now he has daughters, but now he has a son, and that shift is a lot different in the household too, of like the way that the energy is now. Like, my daughter's a lot like me. Like, we need slow time to wake up in the morning. Like, don't really talk to me. Like, I'm probably going to growl at you. Like, I'm going to be grouchy. Whereas like my husband, he's just like up and he's happy and he's ready to rock and like life's good. And he's like making his coffee. And my son's the same exact way. And so there's these differences with the dynamics of just like men and women, and needing that more of that space and that growth, for the evolution of like who the woman's unfolding. And I love like the steadfast and like the confidence and the, I want to say like sureness, but that's not even a word, but like just that, like, I guess it's just like the confidence of the masculine, right? Of just like getting to watch him cultivate that in his son too is so beautiful. And then like also, my dynamics between the two of them, like I definitely like, my daughter's always testing me. So then I look at my son and I'm like, oh, you're so sweet. And he's a Libra. He was just born on his like Libra drizzling rain day, like he just came in stealing my heart from the get-go. And so it's like, I love that, it's also been healing for me to get to raise a son in that sense, because I also am healing a lot of what it means to be a man, and I get to expose him to other men in my life who I love and adore, who bring in qualities that maybe his dad doesn't outwardly carry, but he still needs exposure to. And so I love that, because I have so many brothers and they all are mama's boys and they just absolutely adore my mom, but they also have that really healthy balance of masculine and feminine, of being able to, my one of my brothers is a Cancer, and he just like so beautifully is able to hold me in my process a lot of the times, because he is that masculine space, but he can also drop in deep into that emotional and like the authenticity of depth and truth of life that Cancers hold. Like, they're just so in it, with that. And so I feel so honored all the time to be able to have a little brother who I get to have that relationship with, right? And like my son gets to know him, my daughter gets to know him. And then I have my other brothers too. So, and cousins, and just this big giant family that we get to expose our children with to help shape them into, who they will be.
Oh, I love hearing that. And yeah, it doesn't surprise me that with your daughter, she's just like level up, level up, level up, because I do feel like that is kind of the karmic contract a lot of the time, right? Like your daughter is just your clearest reflection of how you're showing up in service to, you know, the medicine of your womanhood, like how you are actually respecting yourself as a woman, because she's going to do every single thing that you do, pretty much. And so it's like,
I have to mention too that my grandma is an Aries, my mom's a Gemini, I'm an Aries, and my daughter's a Gemini. So we have this very like clear karmic loop happening that I'm like, okay, so like we're really meddling in it in this lifetime. Like we've got a lot here right now in those four generations. And my grandma's still living. So it's cool to be able to again with that like that continuum of like I'm shifting into motherhood, or my mom's shifting into like grandmotherhood, and then my grandma's shifting into great grandmotherhood, right? And it's like, and how is that changing, right? Like how is their relationship as mother daughter shifting and changing, like as my mom's a grandma now, or like it's just constantly evolving, and it's always like just like we keep coming back to where it's like, yeah, we have the medicine woman, sure, if we want to put it on a pedestal, but we also just have the medicine of being a woman.
Yeah, no, I love that you shared that. I mean, in my family lineage, it's like my great grandma was the oldest daughter. My grandma was then the oldest daughter, like the first child. Then my mom was the oldest daughter, the first child, and then me. I'm the oldest daughter and the first child, and it's the same pattern every time. And there's like a lot, and I will be very curious to see if my first child is a girl or a boy whenever that happens in the future. I am very curious. I don't know, but I do think it's also so beautiful what you spoke to of like I speak a lot on this podcast about coming back into right relationship with men as a woman. It's been one of my deepest wounds in my own life, and it's my deepest teaching right now is just figuring out, especially I'm in this transitional period between my last relationship ending, who knows when my next relationship will come, and I'm really deep in the study of just like how do I develop a really healthy relationship with men. And the biggest teaching has been it's not about romance at all, like that is like actually the last part of it that falls into place. It's really like, what's my relationship with my dad? What is my relationship with my male bosses and coworkers? What's my relationship with my male friends? I don't have any brothers, but like my male cousins, the men in my life who I would consider soul brothers, maybe not blood brothers. And then what you spoke to, that part of like how your son has transformed your relationship with the masculine. I feel like a lot of women don't even necessarily think about that when they're thinking about male female polarity dynamics. It's like, what is your polarity dynamic going to be with your little boy? Right? Because you're still holding a masculine and feminine pole, but it's in a totally different context. There is no romantic or sexual nature to it, and it's still just as, if not more, valuable to be in that medicine of the feminine and the masculine dance as a mother to a son. And so hearing all of the teachings that he's brought forth in yourself of like, can you allow yourself to receive? Can you allow yourself to be provided for, to be protected, like that he brought that forth in you? It also sounds like a really important reintegration back into your family line with your mother always working, your grandmother always working. Like, what a powerful shift. That's so, so sweet to hear. Okay, wow. We could go on and on. There's so much that we could talk about, but I would love to give you an opportunity to just share how people can connect with you and your work and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so we've mentioned the Substack Hummingbird Wisdom. I'm pretty consistent about once a week with my essays that I go out on there. And then I also have just started a paid portion to Hummingbird Wisdom that's called Divine Mothers Portal. And I created it mostly around like my breathwork and meditation offerings that I share, usually that are in person. And so this is just a way to kind of have me in your back pocket working on some of these practices. So I've been uploading things. I'm saying like about 1 to 3 things a week. Sometimes that might be like a private podcast. It's really been a space for me to just like, again, like I'm coming back out into this time in my life where I am speaking, I am sharing, I am using my voice. So it's been a place for me to just kind of start to dump there creatively. So private podcasts, a lot of meditations, and then also like some guided journal prompts and personalized practices that you can weave into your life. But I'm really wanting to, especially with my the community that I work with here in my homelands, I'm wanting to just be more accessible, because also I recognize that coming to like a group class is sometimes very intimidating. So And in all reality, I want people to take the work that I'm sharing about back into their own homes, back into the comfort of their own lives, so that they can have those little mini moments of ritual and retreat. That for me is so important to make sure that I'm establishing in, especially women at home. Please, please, please create practices for yourself that help you feel grounded in your days. And I just, yeah, so there's that little portion. It's $22 a month, trying to be very affordable, but also, wanting to give myself again that monetary value and being able to share my gifts and receive back instead of just pouring from that empty cup. So I have that with Hummingbird Wisdom. And then I also mentioned Native Women's Wellness Movement. I pretty much operate all of my consultation underneath Native Women's Wellness Movement, but I work with a lot of local and neighboring tribes, talking about breathwork and meditation, talking about self-care, all kinds of different stuff, doing retreats. We just held our first retreat this past spring, Sacred Rest retreat. It was in Cove, Oregon, and that was a grant funded project that provided 10 scholarship slots to Indigenous women in the Pacific Northwest to attend a 4-day retreat that was done by myself and my teacher, Gillian Bell of Urban Yoga Foundation and the People's Practice. And it was so beautiful. It was so wonderful. But again, like really wanting to create access for Indigenous women to, again, just have the access to these types of things that the white world has access to, that white money typically has access to. So that was a very beautiful passion project to bring forward into the world. And I was just meddling while I was in Shasta, actually, like, okay, so am I going to start looking for some funding? How am I going to structure Sacred Rest for this next year? But it was such a wonderful experience. And I actually had 4 other ladies who are all around my age from our tribe that were practitioners at that retreat. And so that made it even more powerful. I didn't realize as I was structuring things and bringing it all together. I mean, I never could have really imagined with my own mind like how beautiful this retreat could have, or that it was absolutely wonderful. And so I'm really hoping to continue along with that, but I also want to bring Sacred Rest into other communities. So that's also open and on the table with a lot of the tribes and communities I'm working with, is let me bring my practitioners to you guys and let's put on this retreat for your women and your people. And really, when it comes to Native Women's Wellness Movement, and like I spoke to earlier, when it comes to like you have Indigenous people as a collective, and then you have those tribes, bands, and families. And so when I come in, I'm really wanting to facilitate this opportunity for the community to come together to determine what this looks like for them. What does women's work being restored look like in their own community? And that's what's been so beautiful, right? Like to be able to be in Spokane a few months ago and to hear these women talk about all of the knowledge they have around plants, their local plants. And I was just like, you guys have so much. And even gardening, I was like, you guys just have so much here, like you don't know how valuable this is. Like not every community is like this. And so getting to see that and see the differences and see where the strengths are coming out has been really beautiful. So that's Native Women's Wellness Movement. We do a lot of things. I do a lot of speaking and traveling with that. And it's been really fun. And again, like was kickstarted by my daughter. It came in very shortly after I had her, like, this is what we're doing. And so it's formed itself over the last 5 years and continues to grow and build. And eventually it will be a nonprofit and be its own sustainable entity that hopefully continues to shape women's lives and employ women. That's my goal with that. Birth work, postpartum work. Again, I'm just getting ready to launch that off under Hummingbird Wisdom as well. Going to be offering some more postpartum services, yoni steams, moxa, doing all the things womb wise. C-section care is very important in my community again, because we're having a good amount of C-sections done in this area, whether it be with Indigenous people or not, it's happening. And so I also recognize that a lot of those restorative practices postpartum aren't accessible. So wanting to bring forward a lot of that, getting ready to launch that, this has been really heavy on the mind, especially like leading up to this episode. I didn't even realize, like this is what it would be since we've been talking over the past few weeks. And then when I saw your email come in about what you were wanting to talk about, I was like, this is really beautiful and really beautiful timing. So there's that. And then one more passion project that's kind of starting to come forward again is a library outreach center here on the res, an Indigenous sovereign learning center. So really being able to focus on art and archiving and language and being in symbiosis with the seasons and getting to work and pay practitioners, local people to come share their knowledge is really the goal. So a lot of philanthropy, a lot of giving, but me kind of just being like this middle person that really is the vessel and creates these spaces. And then everybody else kind of starts to come in together. So I've been in a big period of time of just trusting myself and trusting my ideas, but then also taking that aligned action and being able to formalize. That's where like I love being in the vision as a projector, but then moving into the earthly realm of formalizing is where I need to go next. So that's kind of a gist of what I have offered right now. I love Substack. It's been so fun to cultivate that community over there. So if you're interested in more long form writing, and again in that membership portion, I'd be so happy to have you.
Amazing. So many cool projects, beautiful projects, sending like lots of strong prayers and support and love your way as you continue to just like flourish and grow and expand with all of that. Everything you were speaking to, I was like, yes, my God. And so beautiful just to repeat that like this all came forth really from the activation of your daughter coming through and your motherhood journey just coming online and seeing that like this is actually the true power of motherhood is just the continuous expansion of capacity and the continuous expansion of that creative life force energy that is just like birth, and not just birth a bunch of babies, have as many babies as you want, but just like this is what we were speaking to, like the medicine of womanhood literally is, and the medicine of motherhood literally is that birthing capacity. And the more and more that women are able to come into whatever their sovereign experience of birth is going to look like for them, that's the blueprint for all the things that they're going to birth moving forward. And you're like a very clear example of that. You are a woman who talk about freaking Aries energy. You're like, let's fucking go. So, yeah, sending just a lot of blessings and prayers and support your way. Excited to see how things continue to evolve. We'll definitely put all of that info in the show notes so people can stay in touch with you. Yeah, thank you so much, Marissa. This has been awesome. It's been wonderful to have you as a guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.